The warehouse floor at Halbrook Logistics went quiet except for the low hum of the conveyor belts. CEO Trent Kessler stood on the mezzanine catwalk above the loading dock, a group of investors beside him in crisp suits, cameras from a business news crew rolling below. "This man," Trent said, pointing down at a gray-haired worker in a faded jumpsuit, "represents everything wrong with legacy staffing. 40 years old technology, 40 years old thinking." The worker, Walter Higgins, kept scanning boxes, without looking up. "We're automating this entire line by spring," Trent added, smirking at the investors. "Walter here just doesn't know it yet." The investors chuckled. Walter set his scanner down gently on the belt. But none of them knew who he really was. Rewind 8 months. Walter Higgins was 61, and for 18 years he had worked the loading dock at Halbrook Logistics, arriving before sunrise, leaving after dark, never once late, never once absent. He wore the same gray jumpsuit every day, kept a small toolbox of hand-sharpened pencils in his back pocket, and ate lunch alone at the same folding table by the loading bay doors. Every evening he walked home past the community college, where his granddaughter, Ivy, was studying mechanical engineering on a scholarship he quietly funded through an account she believed was a state grant. He never corrected her. On his workbench at home sat a small brass model of a conveyor sorting arm, the first prototype he ever built, decades ago, in a garage with his brother. What no one at Halbrook Logistics knew was that Walter had once been an engineer, the engineer, in fact, who designed the automated sorting arm technology that Halbrook's entire distribution network was built on. He and his brother had patented it together in their 20s. When his brother died suddenly in a car accident, Walter sold the patent rights to a small logistics startup for almost nothing. Just enough to bury his brother with dignity and keep the family afloat. That startup became Halbrook Logistics. Walter took a floor job there years later, not for the money, but because being near the machines his brother helped build was the only way he still felt close to him. He never told anyone. Grief, for Walter, was something you carried quietly, on your own shoulders, in a gray uniform nobody looked at twice. When Trent Kessler took over as CEO, he saw Walter as dead weight. He excluded him from the Innovation Town Hall, despite Walter having 20 years more floor experience than anyone in the room. He publicly corrected Walter's process suggestions in a team meeting, calling them how we used to do things before we knew better. He cut Walter's overtime without warning, posting the new schedule on a shared app instead of speaking to him directly. Walter said nothing. He simply nodded, adjusted his scanner strap, and kept working. The investor tour was Trent's chance to prove Halbrook was future-ready. He wanted a dramatic visual, the old guard standing beside the machines about to replace them. So he humiliated Walter on the catwalk, in front of investors, in front of cameras, in front of the very sorting arm technology Walter himself had invented. "He just doesn't know it yet," Trent said again, louder, playing to the cameras. Walter looked up at the catwalk for the first time all morning. He said only one thing, calm and even. "Then there's nothing more to discuss." He clocked out early, walked past the sorting arm, his sorting arm, and didn't look back. The room, oddly, didn't feel like a celebration anymore. Emboldened by the investor tour's applause, Trent accelerated the automation rollout, cutting 3 more veteran floor workers within the month. He told the board Walter's generation couldn't adapt fast enough for where the company was headed. Quietly, though, something strange kept happening. The new automated systems kept malfunctioning in ways no technician on staff could diagnose. Errors buried deep in calibration settings only the machine's original designer would understand. 6 weeks later, Halbrook Logistics received notice of a routine intellectual property audit ahead of a planned acquisition by a larger firm. The acquiring company's legal team, reviewing the original 1980s patent filings for the sorting arm technology, discovered the patent had never been fully transferred, only licensed, under a clause that reverted full ownership to the original inventor if the technology was ever substantially modified without his written consent. Trent's new automation rollout had done exactly that. What nobody at Halbrook Logistics realized was that Walter Higgins wasn't simply a former engineer with sentimental attachment to old machines. He was the sole surviving patent holder of the very technology the company's entire operation depended on, and thanks to that overlooked reversion clause, ownership of the core sorting arm patent had just quietly reverted back to him the moment Trent's team modified it. Walter Higgins, in the eyes of the law, now owned the intellectual property running Halbrook's entire warehouse network. The acquiring company's lead counsel called an emergency meeting with Halbrook's board. She placed the original 1980s patent filing on the table, the inventor's name typed clearly at the top. W. Higgins and D. Higgins. "Do you know who this is?" she asked Trent, sliding the document across. Trent stared at the name, then at a framed photo on the office wall, an old black-and-white picture of two young engineers standing beside a garage-built prototype, a photo he'd walked past 100 times without ever really looking at it. The room went very still. Someone's coffee cup rattled softly against a saucer. There was no shouting, no dramatic courtroom scene. Just a formal notice from Walter's attorney, informing Halbrook Logistics that continued use of the modified sorting technology without a renegotiated licensing agreement constituted patent infringement. The board acted fast. Trent was placed on leave within days pending a full review of the automation rollout and his treatment of legacy staff. Halbrook's chairwoman personally visited Walter at his home, asking him, humbly, honestly, if he would consider returning, not to the floor this time, but as chief technical advisor, with full authority over any future changes to the systems he'd built. Walter thought about it for a few days. Then he agreed, on one condition. The 3 veteran workers Trent had cut would be reinstated first. On a quiet Saturday, Walter sat at his workbench with Ivy, showing her the small brass prototype for the first time, explaining who had really built it and why. "You could have told everyone at the company who you were," Ivy said, turning the little model over in her hands. "Didn't seem important," Walter said. "What mattered was being close to your great-uncle's work every day. That never changed." They sat together in comfortable silence, the late afternoon light catching the brass gears. Nothing left that needed saying. Some people mistake a quiet uniform for a quiet mind and steady hands for an empty resume. But the strongest people rarely need to announce what they've built. They simply keep showing up, keep their patience, and let the truth surface in its own time. Walter Higgins never raised his voice, never demanded credit, never once said the word inventor. He simply waited. And when the truth finally caught up to him, it didn't need to shout. It just made the whole room go still. If this story reminded you that quiet people often carry the loudest truths, subscribe to Hidden Truth Chronicles and turn on notifications. We'll see you in the next story.